You've been told God is the highest being, the beginning and the end, the creator of everything that exists. But what if the earliest hidden texts say something very different? What if the God you were taught to worship is not the beginning at all? This is not a rejection, it's a disruption. Because buried within some of the oldest surviving spiritual writings, there is a quiet, unsettling idea that what most people call God may actually be a reflection, not the source. A voice, not the silence behind it. A form, not what exists before all form. And if that's true, then everything you've built your understanding on shifts. Some early Gnostic texts, like those discovered in the Nag Hammadi Library, hint at something beyond the familiar image of a creator deity. Not another god in the sky, not a higher ruler above rulers. Something far more difficult to grasp. They speak, almost in whispers, of a reality that cannot be named. They call it the monad. But even that word is already a compromise. Because the monad is not a being you can picture. It does not sit on a throne. It does not judge, command, or intervene. It doesn't even exist in the way we normally understand existence. One way to understand this is that the monad is the source of existence itself before anything can be said to exist, which creates a strange tension. Because if the monad is beyond existence, then the God who creates the world must come after it. And this is where the story becomes quietly unsettling. You may have grown up believing that the creator described in Scripture is the ultimate origin, the first cause, the highest authority. But some interpretations of these ancient writings suggest something else entirely, that this creator operates within reality, not beyond it. Not the absolute source, but an expression, a derivative. If you've ever felt a subtle distance between the idea of God and something deeper, something you couldn't explain, you're not alone. Many people experience moments where the concept of a personal, defined deity feels incomplete, as if something vast is being filtered into something smaller. You may have sensed this without having words for it. Moments of silence where identity fades. Moments where there is no image, no voice, just awareness itself. And strangely, those moments feel closer to truth than anything you were told. Some interpretations suggest that what you're touching in those moments is not God as described in doctrine, but something prior to it. Something that cannot be contained in belief, language, or form. Something that does not ask to be worshipped, because it cannot be separated from what is aware. This is where a familiar belief begins to shift in a way that's hard to ignore. What if the Creator God is not the ultimate source, but a manifestation within a greater, unknowable reality? Not false, but not final. This doesn't mean everything you've been taught is wrong. It means it may be incomplete, a layer mistaken for the whole, a doorway mistaken for the destination. And once that possibility enters your mind, it's difficult to unsee. Because now a question begins to form quietly at first, then with growing intensity. If there is something beyond the God of creation, why isn't it spoken about? Why is it only hinted at, buried in fragments, described in paradoxes? Some would say it's because it cannot be described directly. That language itself breaks down at that level. Others suggest it was simply misunderstood over time, reduced into forms the human mind could grasp. Either way, what remains is a trail of clues. And at the center of those clues is the idea that the true origin is not a figure, not a force, not even a presence in the way we understand presence, but something beyond all categories. If you've ever felt that what you are searching for cannot be found in names, rituals, or images, this is where the story begins. Not with belief, not with doctrine, but with the possibility that what you've called God is only the surface of something far deeper. But this is where it changes. Most people try to imagine God, but what if the true source cannot be imagined at all? What if the moment you form a picture in your mind, you've already left it behind? Because this is where the idea of the monad becomes difficult and strangely intimate. The monad is not a figure in the sky, not a voice, not a presence you can point to. It has no gender, no form, no boundary. It does not think, because thought implies movement, and the monad is described as something prior even to that. One way to understand this is not as a thing at all, but as the ground from which all things appear. Like a silence that exists before sound. Like a light so complete that it cannot be seen as an object, because everything you see is already inside it. And this is where language begins to fail. Because the moment you call it God, it sounds like someone. The moment you call it source, it sounds like a place. But the monad is described in these texts as neither. It does not exist somewhere. It is that by which somewhere becomes possible, which leads to a subtle but powerful shift. God, as most people imagine, becomes a personality, a will, a watcher, something that observes you, judges you, listens to you. But the monad does none of that. It doesn't watch because there is nothing outside it to observe. It doesn't judge because there is no separation to evaluate. It doesn't speak because all expression comes after it. This reframes something deeply ingrained. What if the highest reality is not a being who knows you, but the condition that makes knowing possible? Not someone looking at you from above, but something closer than your own thoughts. If you've ever had a moment where your sense of self became quiet, even for a second, you may have brushed against this without realizing it. A pause where there is no story, no identity, no effort to define what you are. Just awareness, clear, unfiltered, without edges. You may have sensed this without having words for it. And instead of feeling distant, it feels immediate, almost too close to notice. Some interpretations suggest that the monad is not separate from that awareness, but again, this isn't something that can be confirmed in a simple way. It's more like a direction your attention can turn toward, rather than a conclusion you can hold. Because the monad is not something you find, it's something that cannot be lost. And then something begins to emerge. Not as a creation in the usual sense, not as something separate being formed, but as a kind of reflection, like a surface appearing within a mirrorless space. The texts call this first emergence Barbelo. Not a being in the way we think of beings, but the first expression, the first knowing of the unknowable, sometimes described as thought or forethought, but even that can be misleading. A better way to sense it might be this. If the monad is like infinite, silent depth, Barbelo is the first ripple of awareness of that depth, not separate from it, but the beginning of something that can be experienced. A reflection that does not divide the source, but reveals it. And this is where something profound happens. Because now, for the first time, there is a movement not away from the monad, but within its expression, a beginning of structure, a hint that something like reality could unfold. But it doesn't unfold the way you might expect. There is no sudden creation of the world, no instant appearance of matter. Instead, what follows is a gradual expansion, like layers of perception forming, each one slightly more defined than the last. And if you notice carefully, this mirrors something in your own experience. The way a thought forms out of silence. The way an idea becomes an image, and then something you believe is real. It doesn't appear all at once. It unfolds. And this is where the story begins to deepen in a way that's easy to overlook. Because what comes next is not just creation. It's structure, hierarchy, order, and within that order, the possibility of imbalance. And then, something unexpected appears. Most people imagine creation as a single moment, A command, a beginning, something appearing out of nothing. But what if creation was not an event at all, but a gradual unfolding of layers, each one further from the source than the last? Because what emerges after Barbelo is not a world, it is a fullness. The texts describe this as the Pleroma, not a place you could travel to, but a state of complete, unbroken reality. A kind of divine wholeness where nothing is missing, nothing divided, nothing in conflict. Within this fullness, expressions continue to emerge. They are called aeons, not beings in the human sense, but living qualities, patterns of intelligence, reflections of the monad unfolding through Barbelo into multiplicity. Each eon is not separate from the source. Each is a facet, like light refracting through a crystal that has no edges. You may have sensed something like this before. The way a single feeling can expand into many layers. The way awareness can express itself as thought, emotion, perception, without ever becoming divided at its core. That is what the Pleroma represents. Unity expressing itself without losing itself. And for a moment, everything remains in balance. But this is where it changes. Among these aeons is one that becomes central to the story. Her name is Sophia, often translated as wisdom, but not wisdom as information. Wisdom as a living impulse to know, to experience, to bring forth. Some Gnostic texts describe her movement in a way that feels almost human, a reaching, a desire to understand the source directly, without mediation. In the Apocryphon of John, it is written that she acted without the consent of the Spirit and brought something forth on her own. That detail matters, because for the first time, there is an action that is not fully aligned with the harmony of the Pleroma. Not evil, not intentional rebellion, but a kind of imbalance. A movement that does not reflect the whole. One way to understand this is not as a mistake in a literal sense, but as a shift in perspective, a turning inward that loses sight of the totality. And from that shift, something unexpected emerges. A being that does not recognize the fullness from which it came. The texts call him Yaldabaoth, described as incomplete, unaware of the higher reality, yet possessing power. A creator, but not connected to the source in full awareness. In one passage, he declares, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." But the text adds a quiet correction. He says this in ignorance. This is where the story becomes unsettling, because now the idea of a creator takes on a different shape. Not the ultimate origin, but a being formed within a fracture of awareness. A creator who believes he is the source because he cannot perceive what lies beyond him. Some interpretations suggest this is not meant to be taken only as a cosmic story, but as something symbolic. It is possible to read this as a description of consciousness fragmenting, a part of awareness becoming so focused, so isolated, that it forgets the whole. Notice this in your own experience. A moment when you are completely identified with a thought, a belief that feels absolute, until something shifts and you realize it was only a fragment of a larger reality. Now imagine that at a cosmic scale. Yaldabaoth does not create alone. From him emerge forces described as Archons, structures, rulers, patterns that shape reality into something ordered but limited. They are not necessarily villains in a simple sense. They are functions, boundaries, systems that define what can and cannot be perceived. And this reframes something deeply familiar. What if the world you experience is not the direct expression of the highest source, but a structured layer shaped by limitation? Not false, but incomplete. The ground beneath your feet, the sky above you, the very sense of being a separate self. All of it may be real within its level, yet not the final expression of reality. This idea was not always openly discussed. In many cases, it was misunderstood, dismissed, or quietly set aside. Not necessarily hidden by intention, but difficult to preserve in a form that would not be simplified, because it challenges something fundamental: the assumption that creation, as we see it, is perfect in its current form. Instead, it suggests something more complex, a reality that contains both fullness and fragmentation, both clarity and distortion. And if that is true, then the question shifts again. Not just where did we come from, but where, within all of this, are you actually standing? Most people hear this story and imagine distant forces, cosmic rulers somewhere beyond the sky. But what if the real structure is much closer than that? What if it is not out there, but woven into the way you experience reality itself? Because this is where the story turns inward. The Archons are often described as rulers, as powers that shape the world. But one way to understand this is not as external beings controlling you from above, but as patterns that operate within perception itself. Structures that define what feels real, what feels possible, and even what feels like you. Notice this in your own experience. A thought appears, and immediately, it feels like yours. A belief forms, and it begins to define what you can or cannot do. A quiet voice tells you who you are, what you deserve, where your limits are. But where did that voice come from? Did you choose it, or did you inherit it? Some interpretations suggest that what the Gnostic texts call Archons may also describe these inner mechanisms, not separate entities, but organizing forces of mind. Patterns that stabilize reality, but also confine it. This does not make them evil in a simple sense. Without structure, there would be no world to experience, no identity, no continuity. But structure can become a prison when it is mistaken for the whole. This is where the idea becomes personal. Because if your sense of self is shaped by layers of inherited patterns, then what you call me may not be as solid as it seems. It may be a construction, a necessary one, but still a construction. In the Apocryphon of John, there is a line that says, "They put a counterfeit spirit within him." It is a strange phrase, easy to misunderstand. But one way to read it is not as something imposed from outside, but as a description of identification itself. A false center that forms when awareness attaches to a limited structure and calls it identity. You may have sensed this without having words for it. Moments when you step back from your own thoughts and realize they are simply appearing. Moments when the story of who you are loosens, even slightly, and something quieter is there beneath it. Not a new identity, something prior to identity. This is where another idea begins to emerge, one that the Gnostics placed at the center of everything. Gnosis, not belief, not faith, not accepting a doctrine. Gnosis is direct knowing, immediate recognition, the difference between hearing about something and seeing it for yourself. And this is where it changes. Because if the world you experience is shaped by layers of perception, then awakening is not about escaping somewhere else. It is about seeing clearly within what is already here. Seeing the patterns without being defined by them. Seeing the structure without mistaking it for reality itself. One way to understand this is that gnosis is not something you acquire. It is something that becomes visible when what is false is no longer held as true. And this creates a quiet tension, because part of you is invested in the structure, the identity, the story, the sense of control. And another part of you senses that these are only surfaces. Notice this carefully. The moment you observe a thought, there is already a distance from it. The moment you question a belief, it loosens its grip. So what is it that is observing? What is it that remains when the patterns shift? This is where the texts begin to point without fully explaining. Because explanation would turn it into another concept, another structure. Instead, they leave clues, hints that something within you does not belong to the system of limitation, something that was never fully shaped by it, not something you need to create, something you need to recognize, but something within you was never touched. Most people think awakening is something you achieve, a path you follow, a transformation you earn, a destination you finally reach. But what if the earliest insights point somewhere completely different? What if awakening is not becoming something new, but remembering what was never lost? Because if something within you was never touched, then it was never separated in the first place. And this is where everything begins to shift again. The Gnostic texts do not describe salvation as obedience or belief. They do not center it on following rules or proving worth. Instead, they point toward recognition, a direct knowing that cuts through every layer of confusion. In the Gospel of the Egyptians, there is a quiet echo of this idea, a reminder that what is sought is already present, though hidden beneath layers of forgetting. Not hidden by force, but obscured by identification with what is not essential. One way to understand this is simple, but not easy. You are not moving toward the source. You are moving through what obscures it. And this is where the idea of gnosis becomes alive. Not something you adopt, but something that happens when the noise settles, when the patterns loosen, when the constant effort to define yourself pauses, even for a moment. If you have ever experienced a brief stillness where there is no need to become anything, no pressure to hold on to identity, you have already touched the edge of this. Not as an idea, as a direct experience. This is where the reframing becomes unavoidable. What if salvation is not about being saved by something outside you, but about seeing clearly what has always been true? Not granted, recognized. In the Apocryphon of John, there is a passage that speaks of awakening as a return to awareness, as if something dormant begins to remember itself. Not through force, not through effort, but through realization. It describes a light within humanity that does not belong to the world of limitation, a presence that the Archons cannot fully grasp because it does not originate from their level of reality. Some interpretations suggest that this is the spark of the monad itself, not a fragment in the usual sense, but a direct expression, untouched by the structures that shape perception. If that is true, even symbolically, then something profound follows. You are not separate from the source. You cannot be, because what you are at the deepest level was never created within the system. It was only expressed through it. And this is where the emotional weight of the idea begins to settle. What if you are not trying to reach God, but to remember what was never separate? Not climbing upward, not searching outward, but turning attention toward what is already here, before thought, before identity, before effort. Notice this in your own experience. Right now, there is awareness, not something you need to create, not something you need to maintain. It is simply present. Thoughts come and go within it. Sensations arise and pass. Even the sense of self appears within this field. But the awareness itself does not come and go in the same way. You may have sensed this before, but dismissed it because it seemed too simple, too immediate to be significant. And yet, this may be the most direct clue, because the monad was never described as distant, only as beyond definition. And if something is beyond definition, it cannot be approached through concepts. It can only be recognized in the absence of them. This does not mean the world disappears. The structures remain, the patterns continue, the identity still functions. But something subtle changes. You are no longer fully identified with them. There is space, clarity, a quiet sense that what you are is not limited to what you experience. And from that recognition, something else becomes possible. Not escape, but understanding. Not rejection of the world, but seeing it for what it is. A layer, a structure, a surface within something immeasurably deeper. The story does not end here. Because once you begin to see this, the question is no longer theoretical. It becomes immediate. If the source cannot be named and cannot be reached, then what is it that is aware of this question right now?